So we are in Psalm 63, and I will just read it first, and then we'll discuss it a little bit. Psalm 63. O God. Actually, I'll read the intro first. A psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory, because your steadfast love is better than life. My lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips. When I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night, for you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped. Okay, so this is a pretty straightforward psalm. David is talking about how he's satisfied in God, how he's seeking God. This is how a lot of our life, kind of where we exist. We aren't always living in the bliss of like perfect peace. Often we're going through very troubling times, and yet seeing that God is satisfying and he is able to fulfill our needs and our desires in a way that nothing else in the world can. And so I was thinking about some of this imagery when he uses a couple of examples. We're seeking God. What are things that we seek like in our life as we kind of try to reconnect this into maybe more of our context rather than just David's context? What are some of the things that we seek in life? Even not necessarily spiritual things, but what are things that we look for and intentionally pursue?
Right now, I'm looking for a new church.
Yeah, good. And so what is your process as you're looking for the church?
I've been going online. I've been looking at the pastors, listening to sermons. I went and did the same thing that I did with Slater County Baptist. I went to the church and just looked at the outside.
Yeah.
Just trying to get a feel for it, asking a lot of prayers, asking if this is the right place for me.
Yep. Yeah, and so you're being intentional, you're doing some research to figure out if this is a right fit for you. And so pursuit of God means that we're not just sitting waiting for God to do stuff to us, although there is an element where that's true, but we're also actively searching out what's God's will. What does he want of us? That's this pursuing idea. And then he talks about, my soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. Now, David, when he's writing this, he's out in the wilderness, in the desert, and probably was experiencing times where he couldn't find water. And for us, I don't know that we've really gone through that. I haven't really been in a situation where I've been so desperate for water because you're walking for miles and miles and there's no water. That doesn't happen too often here. There's a lot of water around us. So I think maybe a better illustration for us is if you're Have you ever been in a situation where you're driving down the highway in some like remote part of the country and your gas needle is on empty and there's no gas stations in sight and you start to like panic? What if I can't get to a gas station in time and I'm stranded because there's no gas stations and I don't know this next town, does that town have one? They don't have any signs that say there's gas stations. So do I turn off and waste precious gas like wandering around the town trying to find a gas station? Do I go on to the next town that's who knows how many miles away? Like, I think that maybe gives us a better kind of modern day picture of David's like, it's like, God, I need this. I'm going to die if I don't. Like, you're anxious. You're starting to panic. And he's pursuing God. He's kind of getting a bit desperate, really knowing that he needs God active in his life or else things are going to derail pretty quickly. And so verse 2 brings us back to he's found God. We've seen that he's looking for God, but he finds God. He's looked upon God in the sanctuary, beholding God's power and glory. And he's seen, as he looked on God, that God's steadfast love is better than life. And so here's the key question, I think, for tonight. What does it mean? What does David mean? And then what do we mean if we echo David's comment? But first, what does David mean when he says, your steadfast love is better than life?
I guess from my point of view, and I'm sorry if I seem to be taking things over,
Oh, you're fine, Claudia.
but I can remember a point in time when I wasn't a Christian, a true Christian. I thought I was a Christian, but I wasn't a true Christian. And now I can't even imagine what it would be like not to have Jesus in my life, not to have the Father to climb up into his lap and hug and talk to him. There's so much peace in me now that was never there. And that's what it means. I would rather have his love than to be here. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm ready for it anytime the Lord wants me.
Yeah. Having God's love is the only thing that can make life meaningful. Otherwise, what's the point of anything that we do here?
Exactly.
Does anybody else want to comment on that or kind of add on to what Claudia was mentioning? The question is, what does David mean when he says that the steadfast love of God is better than life? Or what, as we echo David's words, what does that mean for us?
Well, you're a value to. Come over here. Come over here. You don't have to hide it. There's something going on up there.
Well, when he says unfailing love, I kind of think that means that you're of value to God. You're of incredible worth and unfailing. Nothing's going to change that. Not anything you do or any way you, if you think you're disappointing God, nothing's going to change his love for you.
Yeah, exactly. And because God loves us, we don't even have to fear death, like Claudia said. And Jesus talks about, don't fear man who can kill your body, fear God who can kill your body and destroy your soul. Like God controls what happens to us in this life, but also more than that, he controls what happens to us eternally. And so having the love of God, being in his family, means that we don't have to fear even not only what's going to happen in this life, but what's going to happen to us for eternity, because we'll be with God. Then he explains this a little bit in verses 4 and 5 and 6. He says, therefore, so I will bless you as long as I live. In your name, I will lift up my hands. This echo of praise responding to God's faithful covenant love. And then in verse 5, he explains, kind of illustrating the idea in verse 3, my soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food. So what does this mean? How is our soul satisfied by, what does David mean by comparing the satisfaction in our soul to the satisfaction that we get in our stomach when we eat fat and rich food? What is he trying to get to here?
I think I really like to eat food.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yes.
a lot. It makes me very happy to eat, actually. I'm getting happy now just thinking about it. But so I think it's just a normal, I think it's a really common comparison you can reach for. It'd be like the kind of joy and happiness you get from eating this really delicious, rich, wonderful meal, like a ribeye steak with homemade mashed potatoes. It's like, it makes you so happy. It makes me very happy. So to me, this analogy really strikes home. I totally get what he's saying, but to some people, maybe not, but I really like it.
Yeah.
Comfort food, comforting.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, this isn't just any food. It's specifically
It's
comfort
comfort,
food.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than a good roast and taters, mashed
Mhm.
potatoes. Yeah, totally with you, Tyler.
Yeah, me too. I was actually thinking about this while I was eating dinner today, thinking about the study.
Let's just
continue
this at IHOP.
Seriously, I know. All of you online people are going to miss out here. But go ahead, Kim.
So what this makes me think of is when I make my bone broth and I let it simmer on the stove for 24 hours to suck out all the marrow and the fat and the gelatin and all that. And so you could drink the broth and you're satisfied. Like if you eat fast food or sugar or stuff, you're hungry a lot quicker.
Right.
But the marrow and all that good stuff, it sticks with you and your body's satisfied for a lot longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do want to say that when I have a double quarter pounder from McDonald's, I am satisfied for a while. And it does make me really happy. But anyway.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, so this is a really helpful, and now like food not only makes you feel full and well fed, but it's a joy to eat. Good comfort food, like Janine said, it's pleasurable to eat. The process of eating is pleasurable, as well as the fact that then you don't have those gnawing hunger pains that you did before potentially. And even there's just a restfulness often that comes after eating that is a helpful. Of course, any analogy is imperfect, but it's helpful for understanding when David says we're satisfied by God. This is kind of the satisfaction that he's talking about, that not only is our spiritual hunger fed, but there's this peace and comfort and pleasure that we get out of our covenant relationship with God. And so now what's so interesting though then is he continues, so my soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips. So notice the parallel between the satisfaction and the worship or praise. He's constantly paralleling those two ideas. But it's linked into verse 7, or verse 6 rather first, when I remember you upon my bed. So there's a specific time, not that this is the only time, but there's a specific time when David is being satisfied by God, and it's in the middle of the night. He's awake for whatever reason, maybe because of being pursued by enemies or because of stressful things going on in his life where he can't sleep. He didn't have an iPhone where he could just turn on Audible or a podcast or something in the middle of the night, like I tend to do when I'm feeling sleepless. Maybe not the best habit, because these are actually really good times to meditate on God and pray, which is exactly what David is doing here. So he's thinking about God and remembering him and remembering his covenant faithfulness on his bed, meditating on God in the watches of the night. This is a really practical aspect of David's devotional life towards God. He's spending this time where he can't sleep to meditate on God. And because of that, he's recognizing that God has been his help, and he's able to sing for joy in the shadow of his wings. And we've talked a little bit about that picture a couple, 2-3 weeks ago, being in the shadow of God's wings. I think that was Psalm 60. And then he just continues with these analogies, because my soul clings to you and your right hand upholds me. And then at the end, he's really bringing in a contrast of the difference between the righteous and the wicked. And so he says, but those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. So they'll be destroyed, they'll be killed. They shall be given over to the power of the sword, and it shall be a portion for the jackals. So not only will they be killed in battle probably, but also instead of being buried like someone who's honorable, they'll be eaten by wild animals. And then, so he's contrasting again back to the righteous, and of course the king. The reference to the king in verse 11 is himself, King David. But the king shall rejoice in God, and all who swear by him shall exult, because the mouths of liars will be stopped. And so we see these analogies. I think the biggest aspect of this psalm that's really worth meditating on is this idea of being satisfied in God. It's easy to find that there's a lot of things that it's easy to find at least temporary satisfaction in. And that's not comfort food, is not bad. It's quite easy to turn on a comedy or a TV show or something at night to get some satisfaction before you go to bed when you've been working a long day. There's different things that we can do. Maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's a music radio station that you want to listen to. Like, there's different things that we do that aren't bad that we use to find satisfaction in, and they're encouraging and they're comforting, and there's a joy there, and it's not sinful. It's just one of the gifts that God has given us. Maybe too much can be excess. Like a little bit of ice cream, not bad. Too much, maybe bad. But here, what David is saying is where those things you get a small degree of pleasure and comfort and peace from, God, we can have an endless amount of peace and joy. And so when we're depressed, when we're fearful, when we're feeling anxious about life, turning to God and meditating on his character and who he is from Scripture is the best way to deal with some of that stress in our life. What are you guys' thoughts on this point that David is making about being satisfied and the satisfaction that we can find in God? You online too, feel free to jump in.
I think this psalm is talking about God's faithfulness to us. His steadfast love, and He's going to bless us, and we can remember what He's done for us in the night watches.
Yep.
And He's been our help. So
Yeah.
it's His faithfulness taking care of us.
Right. His right hand upholds us. Exactly.
Well, I like his beginning attitude. He's kind of hungry, and what we should be is seeking and thirsting for God. And when we take moments to think about Him, like on the bed, then we meditate, and as he says in verse 2, to see thy power and thy glory. I have seen that.
Yep.
So it helps us to remember that He's there for us, and that in Him is our strength.
Yeah. Exactly. Right there.
Well, I was just gonna say the beginning part of seeking earnestly. It's like David's cultivating this hunger and this desire for God. He's seeking Him, so he's found Him before. And then in verse 5, when it says, "My soul is satisfied as with marrow and fatness," those things that we do, like eating a bag of chips or watching a Netflix movie or something. Sometimes it's over and you're like, oh, that was good, but I want more.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not satisfying, and it's and it's not satisfying to your soul.
Right.
It may get you out of a little bit of uneasiness or unrest or just a tired long day.
Sometimes it's more of a distraction.
There you
from
go.
the stress than it is actually healing.
Yeah. Not sad. And even what it does satisfy is something, but not the soul.
Right. Yeah. And I think part of where we meditate on God is recognizing everything that is broken about our world. God is in the process of fixing. Like being able to meditate on that is really calming to me. Everything that you look around, there's a lot that's broken in the world. There's a lot to be concerned about in your own life, in politics, in your job, in there's lots to worry about and be stressed about. And ultimately, you have to recognize that God is in control and He is in the process of fixing it. And Jesus Christ coming into the world and the church and all of this is God working on bringing peace and justice and righteousness into the world. And of course, it'll be culminated when Christ comes back. But this can help us work through the pain and evil that we see in our lives. Because otherwise it's totally overwhelming. In His church, through bringing people to a saving knowledge of Christ, I think you look at world and Christian history, and some things have gotten like it's been an ebb and flow of some things getting worse and some things getting better. There's been revivals where many people have been faithful, and you look at other countries right now, they're among Middle Eastern refugees. There's just huge amounts that are coming to the Lord right now. A lot in refugee camps, China. Other places, South Korea is sending out thousands and thousands of missionaries every year. So I think if you just look at one zip code, then you could see like maybe things are getting worse over a long time or better over a long time. But as you look globally, there's an ebb and flow in what God. So you look at Europe. Was non-Christian for a long time before Christian missionaries started to come, and then became very Christian and now is not very Christian. America, of course, later on became very Christian and now seems to be not as Christian. Places like, it's so interesting. One of the most encouraging things I think you can do is read about Christian mission stories. So, does anybody know how? So South Korea is population-wise, it's the most Christian country in the world right now. Many of the largest churches in the world, not just in South Korea, but in the world, are church plants from South Korea. But does anybody know how South Korea became Christian initially? Who brought the gospel to South Korea? Well, it's a fascinating story, and not unparalleled in Christian history. You had I think this was in like the 16th century or so, but there were some Protestant missionaries, Catholic and Protestant missionaries both, who went to Japan and evangelized Japan. And there was a while where Japan was actually okay with having Christians. And then a new regime came in, and Japan threw all of its Christians into prison. All of the believers got put in prison. But at the same time, Korea was at war with Japan. And so you had Christian believers in the same prisons as Korean prisoners of war. And the Japanese Christian believers who were in prison for their faith led the Korean, at the time it wasn't North and South, but the Koreans, they led them to a saving knowledge of Jesus. And those prisoners of war then went back to Korea and evangelized Korea. And now there's millions of believers in Korea and tens of thousands of Korean missionaries all over the world. And so, like, here it looks pretty bad, but as you look at a broader picture in the world, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot that God is doing in the world to build his church. And so I think what we're going to see is when the end times come, so when the Antichrist takes over, things will go from bad to worse at that point. But up until then, God is still in the process of bringing people to a knowledge of his son. The reason why Christ hasn't come back yet is God's grace on the world, because there's people that he still needs to bring into his family. And so that's an encouragement, I think, for us to recognize that it's not just hopeless that things are going to get worse. God is in the process of not necessarily making governments Christian, right? Like, he's not necessarily trying to make America great again, let's say, but he is seeking to build his church and bring people into his family.